Hello and welcome back to Karma Stories. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a compilation of stories from Malicious Compliance. These are episodes that we've released in the past but put all together in one video for you that is about 2 hours long. I hope you enjoy. Let's go ahead and jump right in. This story comes to us from Impressive Sentence 26, written account of everything. I worked for a large property management company many years ago. The property manager was a terrible person. He was cruel to residents in low-income housing and ruled through fear and intimidation. He'd get in his employees' faces, swear at them, and generally try to get people to quit so he could fill positions with friends and minions. He was doing everything in his power to get me to quit. I hated going to work every day. But this was during the recession. I had a baby at home, so quitting was not an option. At one point, he told me I had to keep a detailed log of everything I did all day long, broken down every 15 minutes. I knew he didn't think I would do this. I also knew he'd likely wait months before asking for the documentation. I also knew that he assumed that he could fire me for insubordination if it was not done to his specifications. I was correct. He waited about 3 months and randomly asked me for the documentation. I told him to give me a minute and I'd print it out. When I returned with the full log, he and the assistant manager, who was in cahoots with him, just stared at it with dumbfounded and defeated looks on their faces. A couple of weeks later, I left that property and moved to another job within the company. A few months after that, he and the assistant manager got caught for fraud and stealing money. Payback's a B, I guess. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called ImaginaryYak6487. It says, I'm a property manager for a low-income apartment complex. I've been doing this for 19 years. I've never understood that type of manager's mentality. I did have a person I was training to be my assistant manager, and they had an attitude like this, looking down on residents. I told her that you don't know their story and why they're here. She says, I could never live like this. I care too much about myself and family and don't take handouts. I said, that's all fine and good until something bad happens and you find yourself needing housing. I told her I've been there twice in my life. It helped me get back on my feet after a divorce and after I lost my job, and that's how I got into this industry. Like I said, you don't know someone else's story. After that, she had her nose stuck up in the air and wasn't listening to me. I told her that she would not make it in this industry with that suck-butt attitude and thinking and acting like she was better than everyone else. Go work for some snobby place, cause this ain't it. Okay, first on this comment, yes, you have to be a compassionate and understanding person to work in a situation like that, because you obviously don't know what other people are going through in their lives. This person that the commenter was training definitely didn't belong in that situation. They should have tried out for maybe like a concierge job at a high-income condo building or something. But then the residents in the building would look down on them for just being a lowly concierge, and I don't think their personality would be able to handle that. Back to OP's story, wow, good on you for keeping documentation that whole time. It must have taken many hours every week to completely record everything you did for every 15 minutes that you were on shift. Wow, I wouldn't have that kind of dedication, and I probably would have gotten fired after those 3 months when they asked to see it. This story comes to us from Alice Wilson. Stick to the script, so I did, word for word. I, 18 female, worked at a call center for about 3 months. Mostly helping people reset passwords and answer basic questions. During training, they told us to sound natural and conversational. Cool. I did that and got great feedback from callers. Then we got a new supervisor who flipped if we didn't read the script exactly as written. She said, if you deviate even slightly, you'll be written up. Okay. Next call, a guy says, hey, my account's locked. Can you help me real quick? I respond in robot mode. Hello, thank you for calling. My name is OP, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. How may I assist you with your technical concern today? He paused and said, are you serious? I kept going exactly word for word, even the weird fake empathy lines like, I completely understand how frustrating this unique situation must feel. Mid-call, my supervisor walked by and actually stopped to listen. She tilted her head, looked confused, and asked after the call, why were you talking like that? I just said, you told me to stick to the script. She didn't have a comeback, and funnily enough, the next day, she told our team, okay, just make sure you cover the key points, you can be natural again. Alright, I did 8 years in call centers as part of the many jobs that I've had in the past, and I can tell you that most call centers do have scripts to go by, but they encourage you to make sure you're following the script, but make sure that you are actually engaging with the customer. You can go off script a bit as long as the main points are going through. The only ones they want you to read off verbatim are legal statements that have to be said when the customer's signing up for something, or even at the beginning when you're telling them that the call might be recorded for quality. I think in OP's case, I would have gone straight to the quality people in the call center and said, hey, this is what the boss is asking me to do. Could you maybe have a talk with the boss and let them know that that's not the best way to go about this? Because that's not personal to our customers and it's really not going to get us anywhere. This story comes to us from Book Gnome Noel. You didn't need my help. One of the offices I work for is moving to a new location. I started at this location, worked at it for 4 years, until I was transferred to a closer office. Since they're officially moving next week, they have been packing things up through the week to carry 5 miles away over to their new office, and I have repeatedly offered to help. Yesterday, I made suggestions about helping, offering my truck to carry things, go grab boxes, etc. Every time, I was turned down, and the supervisor finally said, look, we need you to sit there and deal with patients. We don't need your help with the packing. We have this. Cool. I turned around, did my work, completely ignored issues they were having. They needed another set of hands a few times and would call my name, but I was suddenly busy with the patient, or the phone, or whatever else was needed. When they asked about packing some items in particular, I shrugged with no answer. Finally, the supervisor asked if I was going to help with anything. I answered, nope, I'm going to sit here and deal with patients like I was told. As you said, you don't need my help. Today, guess who showed up with a sore back and hobbling? Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Sarcasm Overload Max. It says, they say don't help, then get mad when you don't help. Can't win either way, laugh out loud. OP really could have solidified the fact that they weren't going to help if they said to this supervisor, oh, well, I could come help, but I've been known to have a bit of a bad back, and you wouldn't want me moving those boxes and then possibly needing to file a workers' comp claim, would you? In fact, most workplaces might have you help pack up the boxes, but they're not going to have you help move them because of the fact that you could get injured doing that. Most workplaces will bring in a moving company to actually do the lifting of the boxes. I guess not in the case of OP's place, though. This story comes to us from Marshmelty. I won't touch your stuff, even to help you. Growing up, my younger brother was obsessed with his privacy. Totally fair, except he took it to an extreme and was rude about it. He used to yell at me for even walking near his things. One day, I tried to grab his phone to hand it to him because it was ringing right next to me. He snatched it out of my hand and shouted, "Stop touching my stuff! Never touch anything that's mine, ever!" Alright, message received. Sometime later, he left his laptop on the edge of the table, charger stretched across the floor. I noticed it was going to fall and crash. I reached out to move it, then remembered his rule. So I didn't touch it. About 30 seconds later, he walked by, tripped over his own charger, and the laptop crashed to the floor. He lost his mind. "Why didn't you move it?" he asked me. "You told me to never touch your stuff," I reminded him. He was furious. My parents backed me up. Rule is a rule. Guess who stopped making blanket demands after that? Ah, yes, let's have them not take responsibility for what they did by putting their laptop on the edge of the counter and then having their cord go across in a place where they tripped over it themselves. Yep, that's totally not their fault. That's totally your fault, OP, because you didn't do something about it. Ugh, The sense of entitlement here is huge. This story comes to us from OwlKnow1068. You want all my correspondence? I had a narcissistic GM. I was in a senior role in a small company. The GM hounded staff and expected me to join in, while I did my best to protect them. After huge staff turnover, it was my turn to be the target. One of my tasks was to liaise with our agents in China. We had a multitude of manufacturing projects underway from initial design to shipping. I'd communicate with the agents via WeChat, which is similar to WhatsApp. And because I'd been working with the agents for a while, when we were talking about projects, there would be side chats about the weather, or holidays, or family. Now I was under a microscope. The GM demanded I share all my communication with her. I have no idea why, but I did exactly what she said. I took a screenshot of each message sent or received separately and sent it to her via Slack. Our conversations were not very exciting, but I made sure to send her each and every message. A simple conversation like the following, which would be 10 separate Slack messages. I made sure to get the name and timestamp so she could see exactly what I was doing. Hello, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Great, things are busy. Oh, here too. I'm looking forward to the weekend. Do you have plans? Nope, just relaxing? Yes. Obviously, relationships are important in business, so I made sure I was extra chatty, and, in the interest of efficiency, kept the messages as short as possible. The first day, I'd sent her several hundred messages on Slack within a couple of hours, even sent her haha and emojis. The next day, she told me she didn't need to see all my correspondence after all. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Mike Schwab63. It says, "Too bad it wasn't in Chinese characters." OP responded and said, "That would have been brilliant." Working off of this comment, WeChat has a translation function, so you could talk to them in Chinese and then send the screenshots of that Chinese to the boss, and the boss would have no clue what's going on unless they figured out how to translate the screenshots themselves through AI or whatever. Now, OP did mention in another comment that this boss eventually made OP's position redundant, and OP hasn't been there for a while. This story comes to us from Massive Celery 3395. Manager told me to no longer have my register swapped when it's full. Okay, bet. So I work back at my old Chick-fil-A part-time again. I work face-to-face in the drive-thru. You can normally see us wearing a green vest with 2 money pouches. Normally, when we are busy and get a lot of cash orders, we are supposed to swap out our pouches, since it's 1, dangerous to have a lot of money on you, especially at nighttime, and 2, we can only hold so much cash. As of Monday, our GM told us not to call over the radio for a cash drop since it was a waste of time, and we needed to be pushing drive-thru. Cue Malicious Compliance. It was super busy last night, and I had a bunch of $100 bills. My pouch was so full, I started having to fold the bills for space. Here is the fun part. Someone pulls up in a black Dodge Charger, gets out of the car, and proceeds to rob me. I had at least $700 on me. Our owner was pissed that I cost him $700 plus and asked me why I didn't have my cash dropped. I told him our GM told us we were not doing that anymore. Then, as of today, we now must have our cash dropped if our pouch is over $300. Not only that, our GM got chewed out, and all day she was asking me specifically what my drawer count was. Funny how now she pays attention after losing money. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Swabby. It says, malicious compliance is all well and good, but how are you doing? Getting robbed at work must have been pretty scary, and for them to worry more about the cash than you is pretty sad. I hope you're able to take some you time following the robbery. OP responded and said, honestly, I am still a little rattled about the whole thing of being held at Pew Pew Point, but I am okay. The dude who robbed me said to give him the cash and he would leave. Like you said, my life is more important than some cash, so I gave it up and he left me alone. Absolutely the best thing you can do in a situation like the one that OP was in is give the robber exactly what they're asking for. Because the quicker you can do that, the quicker they will leave and you can call the police and get the situation dealt with. OP, I sincerely hope you have somebody to talk to about this, be it a therapist or a close friend or something, and I hope you can move on from it pretty easily. I want to relate this one to something in my life too though, because back when my wife and I had our convenience store, we ran a second store as a corporate manager, and at that time, that store got robbed in the middle of the night. Now, the guy that was working the till had more cash in the till than he was supposed to have. He had about $400 in there, and he was only allowed to have $100, so he wasn't doing his drops. Now, I've got to say, from watching the surveillance tapes of this robbery in progress, our guy behind the counter almost seemed like he was anticipating the guy coming in. He didn't put his hands up or anything. He just went immediately and took the cash out of the register, put it on the counter, and then took one step back. Everybody in that major convenience store's loss prevention department at corporate thought that this was a complete inside job, although we weren't able to prove it, unfortunately. This story comes to us from Twin Mom 2298. Yes, sir, you're the lawyer, sir. This happened many years ago, but I was just reminded of it last night by a former coworker. I got my degree in business with a paralegal minor. Worked as a paralegal for a few years before moving to a new city. Upon arriving in New City, I found that legal secretaries got paid overtime while paralegals didn't, and with very similar base salaries and similar work hours, at the end of the day, the legal secretaries made more money. So I took a job as a legal secretary. I worked directly for two attorneys. One, L, had a couple years experience, knew I had education and experience to be a paralegal, and utilized me as such. Other, B, was fresh out of law school and newly passed bar exam. He had a massive "I'm the lawyer" chip on his shoulder. One day, named partner, who was notorious for flying off the handle at mistakes, assigned B to prepare some legal documents. Instead of saying, "Hey, named partner needs documents on this file to handle this issue," and having me do them, he takes the time to actually dictate the documents. As I'm working on them, I realize he's made a logistical mistake. He drafted the document in a way that would result in it not being legally enforceable. I go to his office and explain, "Hey, I was working on this, and I noticed X, and that's not how that works. You need to have it do Y instead, or it won't be enforceable." He says, "I know what I'm doing, and that's the way it needs to be done, so just do it as I dictated it." Yep, of course, absolutely. I went and did it his way. Reminded him when I handed it to him that we'd had a prior conversation and that I'd completed the document exactly as he'd wanted it. He happily nods and off he goes to named partner, giving him the finished work. Less than 30 minutes later, named partner is in B's office doorway throwing a hissy fit that the document was prepared that way. "You can't do that. You literally made this document worthless. Blah blah blah." I sat out in my cube and hid behind a piece of paper while named partner told B to prepare the document exactly how I'd told him it needed to be prepared. I wish I could say that going forward B listened to me when I raised concerns, but he only lasted a year, and in that time never lost the "I'm the lawyer, you're not" attitude. Meanwhile, years after I left that job, joined corporate world and moved up in my career, I was still close with named partner, who actually referred my company business, and I attended his funeral when he passed a few years later. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Affectionate Song 36. It says, "I'm a 27-year career paralegal, and at my big law firm, legal secretaries get a 7.5-hour workday instead of my 8-hour day, so they incur overtime pay sooner than I do, and get a full hour lunch instead of my half hour. So nothing's really changed much there, and they wonder why paralegals are so crabby." So what I got out of this story was that the new lawyer wasn't willing to change his ways and pull his own head out of his ass and listen to OP. And they didn't last any more than a year. Does that surprise anybody else here? This story comes to us from Adiantum Veneris. Make it so a person with zero knowledge could understand it? Okay. My previous workplace was an NGO that hired me to do what was considered an impossible task, reaching and gaining the support of several groups that are notoriously difficult to recruit. It was a critical moment, with over $1.2 million in funding at stake. Not to brag, but this happens to be something I'm actually an expert in, one of very few in my country. I got to work and used some pretty unorthodox methods. Initially, management seemed fine with that since the results were extremely effective. Within 8 months, the organization went from being largely irrelevant to having a small army of volunteers, active groups, and vocal ambassadors. It also earned a reputation for being the most radical and interesting player on the scene. The thing is, this success only existed because I was there to compensate for the organization's lack of relevance. Unless they made some deeper structural changes, this was as good as it was going to get. But nobody seemed very interested in making those changes. In fact, they started engaging in increasingly problematic behavior. Think public racist comments by staff, which made it harder and harder to maintain the support I had built. I kept raising the alarm that this wouldn't end well, and eventually, this, along with my unconventional methods, annoyed management enough that they decided to fire me. I pointed out to my manager that if they didn't want to lose all the progress, they'd need to hire someone with similar experience, which would be very difficult since there were so few experts in this field. In response, my manager demanded that I write a document for my future replacement, specifically designed so that somebody with absolutely zero prior knowledge could understand it. Zero knowledge, you say? Alright. I sat down and wrote an extensive document, which included nothing but the most obvious, basic, and offensively unhelpful information. No, you cannot call people slurs. No, not even when they aren't present. Written as if for a third grader. If they hired someone competent, they wouldn't need the document anyway. If they hired someone clueless, well, they'd probably be able to understand it. I left the organization in September, but stayed in touch with some of my former crew. By the end of November, half the volunteers I had recruited dropped out. The 200 plus people involved in one of the flagship projects simply stopped showing up. The assistance network stopped responding altogether. They tried to continue one of the other long-running projects, but since they didn't know how or why it worked, it flopped gloriously and ended after just one more session. The annual fundraiser I had started completely failed when they tried to replicate it in December. Only 7 people showed up. 3 of the group chose to leave and operate under a different host, and they publicly called out management for being both out of touch and abusive. Oh, and as of today, it looks like they lost the $1.2 million in funding too. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called T. James V. It says, "Wow, talk about manglement. You've got to be seriously out of touch to see a successful project, poison it with bad PR, and then fire the expert behind it for raising concerns. Then to have the nerve and ignorance to ask said expert to write a cheat sheet for dummies to handle this huge, complicated, and high-stakes project. As if a new hire with a tutorial can replace the effing expert." OP responded and said, "It was both infuriating and hilarious to me that they both fired me due to taking an issue with my methods, that's what they claimed anyway, and at the same breath, asked for the recipe." Another commenter down below called ECP001 said, "Once hearing 'you're fired' or the equivalent, anything that happens is not your effing problem. Just grab your personal stuff and leave. Deadlines, open commitments, and pending responses are someone else's responsibility, even if that person hasn't been hired yet. Management can create situations where, surprisingly, crap does flow uphill." OP responded to this one and said, "I tried to maintain a level of professionalism, at least superficially." I completely agree with the commenter. If you fire me, why the heck would I do anything else for you? Yeah, no. And if you'd told me to write that before you fired me, I would obviously see the writing was on the wall there as well. Yeah, you definitely don't owe them anything, especially when they say you're done. Now, OP updated this story a year later. This was posted 4 days ago. It's titled, "Update, make it so a person with zero knowledge could understand it." Okay. About a year ago, I wrote a very messy and awkwardly worded post describing how my old boss had me fired for being a whistleblower. They cited my very well-proven unorthodox methods, among other bogus claims, and demanded I create a document for my future replacement. Make it so a person with zero knowledge could understand it, they said. So I did. I never expected to write a follow-up, and definitely not this one. I couldn't have come up with this chain of events if I'd tried. Predictably, things began to unravel almost immediately after I left the organization. Projects collapsed, partnerships I had built disintegrated, volunteers left, some in protest. Community engagement, trust, and support from our target groups vanished. My replacement, not only completely clueless, but also a non-functional alcoholic who didn't even want the job. Apparently, she had been lied to. She managed to drive every single program into the ground. That, in turn, alienated the donors. But that's not even the whole story. One of the comments on my original post, shout out to user Sean BZA, suggested I contact the IRS, as there might be fraud involved. Well, you weren't far off. I didn't contact any authorities and tried to avoid escalating anything. But I accidentally tipped off the manager of the organization's biggest funder that something was wrong. I didn't even realize it at the time. We just ran into each other at an event and started chatting. I casually mentioned I'd been fired from the organization that December. The manager looked confused. What do you mean? They said you worked there until March and left on your own. After a few more puzzled exchanges, I also mentioned that the crew from one of the flagship programs had shut it down a few months prior. Turns out the organization reported it as if the program was still running. Long story short, the foundation investigated, and it was not pretty. But wait, there's more. The other major funder was a government grant program. On my very first day of work, I flat out told them the grant was extremely unreliable and would likely last only 2 to 3 years before being shut down for being too progressive. I urged them to prepare a backup plan for when that inevitably happened. Well, guess how that turned out? And now for the weirdest plot twist. Eventually, the CEO decided to jump the sinking, burning ship and quit. Or maybe they got fired. When I saw the open call for a new CEO, I decided, mostly as a troll move, to apply, just for my own amusement. I didn't expect to hear back given my history with the organization and, frankly, my limited experience in that type of role. My expertise is very niche. I just wanted to rub it in a little. Sent my resume and cover letter, then forgot about it. Well, a couple of months later, they called, asked if I was still interested, and invited me for an interview. I thought about it for a few minutes and decided to politely decline. It was tempting, honestly, but I knew I'd hate the job, and probably be terrible at it too. My skills and my heart lie elsewhere. I've recently decided to take a break from work altogether to focus on physical and mental health, and while I'm at it, pursue a master's degree. Best of luck to whoever takes that CEO position, they're going to need it. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Boring History Fan. It says, I suspect they'd have hired you as CEO solely so they could scapegoat you. Once you know there's fraud afoot, no reason to touch anything to do with them, even with a 10-foot pole. OP responded and said, honestly, it might be the case, since they already proved ethics are not their forte. Another commenter called the Razialim said, I would have at least taken the interview just for the comedic value of walking into the room and being like, surprise, mother effers. From the sounds of things, they don't know their butt from their elbow, so it's very possible that whoever was setting up and conducting the interviews either didn't know or remember you. Yeah, with all the problems that OP has highlighted for this company and just the shady crap that's going on, there would be no way you could ever convince me to take that CEO job, especially since in another comment, they said that the CEO doesn't get paid well either. OP, I wish you the best and good luck on getting your master's. That is awesome. This story comes to us from Plonk. When the metric becomes the target, a cautionary tale on being careful what you measure. This happened about 8 years ago when I was still working for a North American Class 1 railroad. I worked in IT, specifically in a department whose primary role was to generate metrics and regulatory reporting for the Surface Transportation Board and their ilk. Most of our measures were inward-facing though, covering such things as volume, dwell, revenue, and productivity. This story involves a problematic dashboard in the last category, specifically a measure of the productivity of our unionized office workers. The managers loved it because it gave them a weekly graph of who needed corrective punishment for underperforming. Our toxic CEO of the day was all about punishment. They even had quotas to meet. It was in regards to this last one that, I'll call him B, made the short walk across to our building so that he could ask me about the metric. He'd just come from an uncomfortable meeting with his direct manager who showed him how he was the lowest performing employee on their graph, by a wide margin. His manager told him to pick up the pace or he'd face potential repercussions, possibly even a 1-week suspension. B came to me because he knew I had access to the back end of the metrics, and he wanted to know what they were measuring him on because he was never not busy. Some important background on B is that he was a very senior, conscientious employee. He had as much experience as the rest of his group combined, and he came to me because we went back about 20 years from my time in the union before I moved to IT. The job of their group was to work the queue, that is, go into the failure queue of events that had caked for one reason or another, resolve the issue, and allow the automated functions to flow properly. A couple of trivial examples would be a train lift failing because the cars had not been properly reported into the customer's track, or conversely, they'd been reported in, but the customer had not electronically released them out yet. Because he had so much experience, B took it upon himself to handpick the really messy, time-consuming ones from the queue, ones where somebody had backdated events, and it took some faffing about to figure out what was wrong, and what needed to be fixed. Or where a conductor took all the paperwork home and forgot to update this tablet with the switching that he'd done. Basically, if it was something that might require phone calls and deep research, he would deal with it, rather than let inexperienced folks struggle with it. I pulled up a pre-production version of the dashboard and scrolled through the source code to find the important bits. We discovered that it was looking for clusters of specific event types reported under an employee's user ID, with at least a 2-minute gap between the clusters. He was puzzled over the last requirement, but I explained that it was so that a single train being processed would only count as one event. It might take a few minutes to fix the train, but the reporting was at the car level, and as long as no more than 2 minutes elapsed between the report on one car and the next, it would all count as a single incident to the dashboard. So it doesn't look at how many records you handle, only that they happen more than 2 minutes apart? He paused for a moment before adding, "That's really dumb. They don't care about complexity. They're seriously just counting how many times a person clicks OK. Somebody could game that pretty easily if they wanted. He walked away without saying anything else, but I could see the mental gears turning. He came back to me a couple of weeks later to give me the good news. He had gone from being the most underperforming person in his group to being their top employee by just as big a margin. "It's great," he told me. "Forget all the complicated crap. I'm just grabbing the biggest trains from the queue. I work one screen of cars, then sit back and drink my coffee for exactly 3 minutes before I process the next. I finally have time to complete the crossword puzzle in my paper." Sadly, the company attributed his malicious turnaround to their draconian discipline practices and never clued in that while their numbers went up, their actual productivity had tanked a bit. The only real consequence to him was that his job became a lot easier, and he got to slide into retirement on a high note. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Costing Geek. It says, "This effect is frequently referred to as Goodhart's Law. In its simplest form, states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure." Unfortunately, when you're tracking so many metrics, it really becomes only the numbers that matter to the people higher up, and sometimes the actual process just falls by the wayside. B in this story was fortunate to have OP as a friend and realize they were able to game the system to make sliding into retirement a heck of a lot easier. This story comes to us from 0313. "You want me to answer your office phone for you while I'm working from home?" Several years ago, a friend, Mark, started a home-based computer software business. He and his wife lived in their home for about 10 years and had a well-established home phone number. This was around the time that cell phones were just beginning to be popular, so 95% of people still used mainly landlines. Mark worked 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., the same shift as his wife, so his customers could be free to discuss their computer needs uninterrupted after their own businesses closed for the day. Most computer maintenance still had to be done in person instead of remotely, so customers could drop off devices after work and pick them up from Mark's back porch on their way to work the next day. All went swimmingly for a few months until a new doctor opened up a practice in town, complete with a telephone number differing from Mark's by 1 digit. Mark's number had a 3, where the medical office had an 8 in the last 4 number combination. Misdialing was frequent. At first, there were occasional calls to which Mark would patiently redirect the caller. As time wore on and the practice got more and more referrals from local hospitals to give Dr. Newentown an established client base, the calls began to come at all hours, 24 hours a day, weekends, nights, holidays, you name it. The office still got calls after hours to an answering service for patients to find out who was on call, and for the hospital staff to reach doctors after hours. Mark had to unplug the phone just to have a conversation over lunch with his wife, and in order to sleep. Also not ideal when you have 3 daughters of dating age out after dark. Mark called the doctor's office and asked them to please change their phone number so he and his family could get some peace and quiet, and so he could build his own business to support them. Since he had his phone longer, he felt the doctor should be gracious and change his number to a different one to stop the confusion. He was told in about so many words by the doctor that it was too bad, but nothing was going to be done, as advertising, stationery, business cards, and signage were expensive to redo, not to mention convey the new information to all his patients, medical registries, the medical board and societies, and hospitals. Just do the best you can. I'm sure the calls will stop soon. Good luck to you. Okie dokie. I'll do my best to take care of things, Mark cheerfully replied. After that, Mark began to field all the calls that came in personally. You've had the sniffles all morning after working in the yard around pollen? You'd better come right in. You start coughing every time you smoke a cigarette? Come on in. I'm not the doctor, but a temperature of 98.9 sounds a little high to me. We'll see you right after lunch today. You're new in town and have kids who need physicals and shots for school next week? It just so happens we have an opening in an hour. No, don't worry. We can take all 5 of them at once, today. Whatever the problem was, he started making appointments for each and every person calling. All were delighted to have such personal attention and prompt appointments. Sure, we take all insurance plans, come right in. He also made routine checkup type appointments for 4:30 p.m. one Friday afternoon for 6 different people. Bright and early the next Monday morning, Dr. Newentown called and begged him to stop. Mark said, "I will if you will." The doctor had a new phone number before the end of the week. There are so many comments down below this one of people with similar stories. One for a radio station where they sent everybody to the radio station immediately because they'd all won the grand prize. Another one taking tee-off times for a golf course and saying, "Wow, you're lucky. We just had an opening at 8:20 a.m. on Saturday." And the best one from a user called Wilk Van Buren, it says, "Not me, but a friend of mine had a house phone that was 2 digits off the local video store. His younger sister worked at that video store. He was forever getting yelled at by her because people would call his house and he would tell them they had plenty of a particular movie in stock and would be happy to reserve one for them, causing his sister no end of frustration when they showed up at the store." It really was simpler times back when the phone numbers didn't come up when you were calling somebody else. There used to be so many good phone prank calls that could be done. I mean, just watch The Simpsons sometimes and you'll see a whole bunch of them. This story comes to us from Primary Ladder 8310. Don't touch that valve? Okay. Sorry in advance, this may be a little long. Also, sorry for any punctuation errors. English is my first language, laugh out loud. Back in the early 2000s, I was a concrete mixer driver. Mostly, I drove a front mixer, which means the high end of the barrel and the opening is in the front. Because the driver has so much control over the concrete pouring operation, while I pour, I can start or stop or control the flow. I sit rather high, so I can better see the job site. I can also easily move the truck while pouring, and I can hydraulically move the chute left, right, up, or down. So they are more desired, mostly because the crew receiving the load can use less people than with a cheaper rear truck. Keep in mind, the concrete load is batched in the plant and loaded in the truck straight away for delivery. As the ingredients start to harden, the mix heats up. The longer the mix is in the truck, the more the concrete heats up and starts to set. 2 ways to slow this down is to slow the rotation to the slowest speed, reducing friction, and add water to cool the load. Typically, you want to pour the load within an hour of being batched. One day, I poured a job and ended up with about 4 cubic yards of concrete left over. Normally, I would take this back to the yard and pour it in large block forms to make large 1 cubic yard interlocking bricks to be sold for retaining walls. However, this day there was a contractor close by where I was that needed a little more concrete to finish a basement floor in a new construction home. Great, thanks dispatch. We have a truck not too far away from you with extra concrete that will sell to you at a discount. Contractor agrees because it saves him money, and he does not have to wait. So I head there. Once on site, I set up really quick, check my load, and add water as needed to get a good flow. I pour for a little bit, and the contractor asks for more water. Here's the thing. My load is over 2 hours old right now, and it is heating up fast. It needs more water more often to remain fluid. The water evaporates out quickly, and the concrete gets thicker. Each of our trucks carries 300 gallons of water used for the concrete and cleaning the truck when done. Under the water tank, there is a main shutoff valve. Below that is a pipe that runs to the cab, with another valve, then up to the barrel to water the load. 2 more valves for the upper and lower water hoses, and 1 more for a drain to the ground. All these, except for the barrel valve, are located outside the truck behind the cab. The contractor gets angry that I have to stop often to add water. Remember, the load is old by concrete standards. As a concrete contractor, he should know that. He comes up to me and says, "Open the barrel valve and add water." Nowhere near that nice. Then he says, "Do not touch that valve again. Leave it open and I will control the water." Again, nowhere near that nice. Now mix that up and start pouring. What he's doing is shutting off the main valve from the outside when he decides there is enough water. Cue malicious compliance. He comes out 2 more times and adds water. Finally, as they get close to being done, some of the extra guys on the crew come up, open the main valve, grab my hose, and start washing their tools. Because they open the main valve, they're also adding water to the barrel. Now, I am not to touch the barrel valve, so I don't. I don't say a word. I don't touch the valve. The barrel line dumps 1 gallon of water per second. Just over a minute later, about 70 gallons of water rush down the chute and into the basement. The contractor comes out of the building screaming, comes up to me and he says, "What is your problem?" I said, "I don't have a problem. The problem is, you thought you could do my job and yours, and you can't. Now you have a problem." As I finished cleaning the truck, he was calling every number for my company to complain. When I got back to the yard, the plant manager wanted to know what happened. After I explained the situation, I found out the company as a whole had an issue with this contractor. I never heard anything about it, nor did I ever see that contractor again. It's funny how this story took me back to when I was a little boy playing with my little Tonka trucks in my sandbox behind my house. Learning about concrete mixers today and how they work and all the stuff involved with them was pretty cool, I've got to admit. I really enjoyed this story. It was a bit fluid at the beginning, but then it kinda set up nicely and became a very solid story. This story comes to us from Imaginary Fact 3486. Want your dogs to be off leash in the park? It would be a shame if they escape. This is a unique one because it was malicious compliance against me and my neighbors by the city. I can't stop thinking about how genius their malicious compliance was, so had to post here. Some backstory. I live beside a 4-quadrant park with cross streets going through. So each quadrant is 1 block by 1 block in size. One of those quadrants is fenced in and may or may not be owned by the local school district. There were some shady deals and it's not clear if they ever legally owned the quadrant. I won't go into the details of that, but the neighborhood has been fighting for access to the park for as long as I can remember. Recently, that quadrant was completely renovated using public funds. Since it is used during the day as an area for the kids, it has decent security. The only way in and out is through 4 doors at each corner of the quadrant. The deal struck with the community is that during non-school hours, Monday to Friday after 3 p.m., Saturday and Sunday, the quadrant would be open to the public, and those doors would be unlocked. Shortly after the park opened, people, myself included, this isn't Am I the Butthole? I know I shouldn't have. This is a self-deprecating post. began letting their dogs run in this park. It was perfect since it was completely fenced in. When others started complaining to the city, my wife and I stopped letting our dog in there, but others kept using it. The city couldn't just lock it up and deprive everyone access, but how to prevent unleashed dogs? In my opinion, they come up with the most simple yet genius solution. Rather than lock all the doors to the park, they padlock them open during non-school hours. Now, if you come in to let your dog run, there are 4 gaping escapes into a relatively high traffic area that your dog could run through. I still see a few very well-trained dogs running around in there, but most people are not going to risk it anymore. So, OP, are you saying that the city was the one who let the dogs out? Okay, in my opinion, I don't think they should be opening those gates at all to let anybody in, let alone the dogs, because if there's kids playing in there during the school days, you don't want them stepping in dog crap or other things, because I know most people will pick up after their animals, but there are definitely some that don't. You know, those entitled dog owners that just walk around and don't even pay attention to the dog. They're on their phone or something while their dog's taking a giant dookie right in the middle of the play area. Yeah, why should the students have to deal with that? I mean, come on. Just keep the gate closed. It's a better situation. This story comes to us from No Strike 7448. Customer complained I was rude. So a couple weeks ago, my boss gave me a talking to. For reference, I work at a very small independent neighborhood coffee shop. I know most of the regulars by order, and the newbies I can generally give a good time to. This particular customer, regular though she is absolutely garbage. Rude, entitled, belittling, disrespectful, you name it. Usually, I try to give minimal interaction, but one day, I apparently didn't do things just right. So I get to work one day, and the boss tells me he's gotten a complaint. Now, I've been there for almost 13 years. And aside from the growing pains of starting what is the equivalent of a coffee shop version of a dive bar, I have complaints that I can count on one hand. Anyway, he goes on to tell me that a customer has complained that I've been rude or dismissive, etc. I say, okay, I will definitely be mindful of things with this customer moving forward. Cue Malicious Compliance. Every single time I have seen her since, she gets the absolute over-the-top Stepford barista treatment. Think June Cleaver ratcheted up to 13. Just pouring on the Midwestern nice like a thick saccharine soup. I've been doing this for at least 2, maybe 2.5 weeks, and believe me when I say that it drives me absolutely out of my mind to do it. It takes so much energy to treat this human this way. Except today. Today, I gave her the exact same treatment as I have been. Except today, she made a crucial error. She let it slip that the way I talk to her is irritating. When I tell you I haven't had such a rush of happy brain chemicals in almost a decade, it's not a lie. And now that I know it annoys her, it'll keep happening. Because now, it's not going to take excess energy to do it. Now, it's fueled by spite. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called Bluefoot. It says, "What I don't understand is why she comes back. I live in a smallish town, and there are at least 7 places to get my morning coffee." Well, to the commenter, I've got to tell you, some people just aren't happy unless they're unhappy and making everybody else around them pissed off. It truly is a case of if they can't be happy themselves, they want to drag everyone else down to their level, and they might not even realize that they're doing it. This story comes to us from Echidna Outside 9964. You want me to stop answering the phone? You got it. This happened when I was working at a cemetery. The managers were crazy micromanagers. When I first started as an admin receptionist, I would answer the door. We locked it for COVID reasons. Answer the phones and transfer to others. I would also help the family service advisors with their scheduling. They were always super busy attending to grieving families, and you never rush families, obviously, so they would often be quite swamped. We then had a team meeting where I was personally called out for not doing my job. I was doing the job of others. I shouldn't be answering the phone since the family service advisor should be answering. We had caller ID, so we knew who was calling. And the family service advisors should answer the door for their own appointments. The family service advisors should schedule their own appointments, even if it meant they started falling behind on their paperwork and being late to funerals. So I did as I was asked and stopped. I just sat there and got paid for doing nothing. I got called out again for not answering or scheduling. I showed them the meeting agenda they provided, outlining how I shouldn't be doing that anymore. Needless to say, I didn't last long there in an effort to keep my sanity. OP added an edit down at the bottom. It says, edit, for a bit more context, me and the family service advisors worked like a well-oiled machine by the time they called me out. I definitely knew the quality of service would suffer by my complying. I'm not like this amazing person, but I really believed we were helping people and loved going above and beyond to provide help when grieving families had to deal with administration and bureaucratic nonsense at the worst time of their lives. It was one of those cases of the managers not seeing my value. I have dozens and dozens of other horror stories from my 2 years there. The last straw being they wrongfully terminated one of the family service advisors for being sick. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Tremenda Carucha. It says, it's frustrating how often people get caught in the middle of poor management decisions, but sometimes standing up for what makes sense is the best way to protect your own sanity and boundaries, especially when it helps you walk away from a toxic environment with your peace of mind intact. I don't know about this one. You could say that OP was in a dead-end job anyway, and there were just a bunch of people lined up dying to replace her. But then they'd realize that they'd all be buried in paperwork and have to deal with stiff management. I don't blame OP for having some grave concerns about the management, because I think if I were working for them, it would be the death of me. This story comes to us from No Bait. Want pictures of all the transactions and deposits? You got it. Once upon a time, I worked for a boss who would try to passively micromanage my work. For context, I was the manager of multiple locations, and I would handle everything that is related to the store: the cash, vendor invoices, profits, and everything in between. When I first took up this position, they expected me to learn everything on my own. No proper training, no one to reach out to if I was stuck at something. However, gradually, I picked it all up and mastered every single entry and transaction. When this manager started seeing my progress, he started asking me all the unnecessary whys and how come this and how come that. He then started questioning my accounting and said, from this point on, I want pictures of all the transactions you handle. Say no more. For the next few months, I would bombard his phone with every little transaction detail and tag him in everything that I was doing. If something's not taken care of and the upper management questions me, I'd simply say, I asked my boss, but he never responded. Eventually, this boss called me one day and asked me to stop sending him pictures because his new phone is now lagging due to low storage, and he has to spend a lot of time deleting those thousands of pictures. I know this is not even close to some of the posts here, but malicious is malicious, I guess. Thank you for reading. This boss never responded to anything that OP sent them, and then they contacted OP when their phone started lagging. Anybody want to make a bet that the boss never even looked at a single one of those messages from OP until their phone started slowing down? Can we also acknowledge the fact that OP was being required by their manager to send financial records and other things that should be secure in pictures on a phone to their manager's phone? Yeah, that's not secure at all. This story comes to us from Bidu Simp 1. Just zip up your pocket. This is a really minor case of malicious compliance, especially compared to some of the stories here, but I find this really funny and I wanted to share it. I was having a conversation with my mom in the car and I needed to get my phone out for something. It took me about 2.5 seconds longer because I always zip up my jacket pockets. Mom started teasing, kind of berating me for being so anxious that I need to zip my pockets every time, and that I really don't need to, as she never zipped her pocket and her phone always stays put. I remind her that I take public transportation to school and don't care how likely it would be that my phone falls out of my pocket if one bad roll of the dice would make me lose my phone completely. She brushes that off entirely and goes back to, my phone never falls out of my pocket. This really annoys me, especially because when my mom's passionate about something, She tends to not listen to any reason. However, unfortunately for her, I got the intense need to prove a point from her side of the family. So I shrug at her and unclip my seatbelt. The following conversation went on as so. "What are you doing? Put your seatbelt back on." "Why? It's not like you're going to crash." "That doesn't matter. Put your seatbelt back on." "But I drive with you all the time, and I've never once actually needed the seatbelt." My mom glared at me for a few seconds, zipped up her pocket, then told me to put the seatbelt back on, which I did. So I'm not sure if we should be calling this one malicious compliance or malicious education. This is the kind of story that OP can bring out at any kind of family gathering just to make mom a little bit embarrassed and make OP seem like an absolute boss. This story comes to us from Primary Ladder 8310, How I Got My CDL Commercial Driver's License. If you've seen my other posts in this sub, Reddit, they all seem to do something with trucking and diesel mechanics, which was my entire adult careers. I think truck driving is mostly about compliance and malicious compliance. I hope this fits here. In high school, I went to tech school for auto mechanics. Since I was little, I always wanted to be a mechanic. Upon graduation, I went directly to work as a mechanic. The work didn't bother me so much, but I hated the shop. One day, I realized the best part of my day was the test drive. So I thought being a truck driver would be the perfect job for me. So I worked towards that goal. Soon after my 20th birthday, I got a job driving a truck. I loved the open road. Back then, Pennsylvania used the Class 1, 2, 3 license system. Class 1 was for 18-wheelers. Class 2 was for large trucks over 30,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. Class 3 was passenger vehicles. The company I worked for had 2 delivery trucks, and I was driver number 2. All was great until... About 3.5 years after I started, Pennsylvania decided to go with the Federal Commercial Driver's License. The classes all work the same, with differences. Instead of 1, 2, 3, it's now A, B, C. Class A is 18-wheelers. Class B is all other trucks over 27,000 pounds. And Class C was passenger vehicles. Class 3 and Class C vehicles only needed a regular driver's license to drive them. All other classes required extra testing to get the proper license. Once you had your truck permit, you had to be able to get a truck and licensed driver to test drive and practice with. Then take the driving test, followed by the written test to get your license. I have a problem. I don't know another CDL driver, nor anyone who will allow me to borrow a truck to take the test. My only other option is to enroll into a truck driving school. At 20, living on my own, that was not an option. Our trucks were originally rated at Class 3 because they had no air brakes and weighed 28,000 pounds. The company chose this route so they could pay drivers less. However, with the federal class system, our trucks are now Class B, requiring a CDL. So, the characters. There is me, OP, a 20 male truck driver, Fred, 40-ish male, the company part owner, John, 30-ish male, my manager under Fred. Pennsylvania had a 3-month deadline to get your CDL, or you cannot drive. One day, John asks me, "Are you going to get your CDL?" I say, "I don't know. Is the company going to pay for it?" "I don't know," said John. "Let me talk to Fred." At this point, I am the only driver they have. John and I work together well. I have a great working relationship with everyone in the company and our customers as well. Well, everyone but Fred. Fred bought into the company a year ago. From day one, he had an issue with me. He always assumed I was doing the wrong thing, but never had true cause. Since day one, he would only speak to me if he had to. No small talk, no smile. A month passes and I do not get an answer one way or the other. Till Fred asks me one day, "Are you going to get your CDL?" I say, "Are you paying for it?" "No," he says. So I reply, "No," as well. Another month goes by and Fred and I have the same conversation. But this time Fred asked, "What are you going to do for work?" I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "This isn't the only job." The malicious compliance. What I knew that Fred apparently didn't realize was that in just over 2 weeks, they could not deliver product unless they hire someone for a lot more money to drive. So they were going to have to comply to my demand or lose 85% of their business. With almost 2 weeks to go till the deadline, John says to me, "On Saturday, take the company pickup, drive to Harrisburg, and get your permit. You will be paid for your time." I found a few weeks earlier that if I drove the same truck for 3 years, I could get a waiver of the permit, as long as the company owner is willing to sign an affidavit that I drove there 3 years or more. I could skip all of the driving portion, get my permit, then take the written test and get my CDL. I did not tell Fred that. Instead, I went to the other owner of the company and had him sign. Saturday comes, I get on the road at 4 a.m. to be in Harrisburg DMV by 5:30 or 6 a.m. When I get there, I am surprised. The line for the DMV runs out the door and around the block. I estimate when they open at 7 a.m., I will be about 500th in line. It took another 2.5 hours, but I walked out with my permit. Now for the test. To Pennsylvania's credit, they had a firehouse in every county as a temporary CDL testing site, due to the volume of people who needed testing. I tried to get into 3 different testing sites, but they were packed and closed before I navigated the line to get in. After that, my office called around to reserve a spot for me. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, I get a call to get to a particular testing site in 1 hour, and I have a seat to take the test. The problem, I was an hour and a half away from the site. Well, I floored it, bent a few laws, but I got to the site as they were closing the doors and got in. To get a CDL, you must pass the general truck test and the air brake test. Then you can take the test for endorsements on your license. They include tanker, school bus, passenger bus, double buses, think long bus that bends in the middle, double and triple trailers, commonly seen behind FedEx and UPS trucks, and lastly, hazmat, for trucks hauling hazardous materials over 50 pounds. I was there to take 2 tests. I took all but one. I took every test but hazmat. I was the last person to walk in and sit down with my test. I was the first to leave. As I was walking out, I heard one guy say to his friend, "I guess he failed." In the back of the room was a computer that graded your test and gave you the score right then. 80 and above to pass. Fingers crossed my test was ran through the computer. I passed all tests, with my lowest score being an 87. Each test scored individually. That Saturday, same deal. Take the pickup, drive to Harrisburg, get my license. But this time, I left at 3 a.m. And good thing I did. This time, I was about 300th in line. It still took 2 hours once I got inside. By the time I came out with my license, the line was over 1,500 people and growing. All in all, over that 2-week period, I got about 25 hours of overtime, a CDL, and a pay raise. I left the company about a year later. I continued to drive trucks for the next 11 years before becoming a diesel tech. Having a CDL was very helpful through my diesel career. In most cases, having the CDL got me to the front of the line and increased my starting salary. In some shops I worked, I was the only tech legal to drive a truck on test drives. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called RedditFan26. It says, "Great story, thank you for sharing it with us. So in the end, which job did you find to be more satisfying? Thanks in advance for any answers you choose to provide." OP responded and said, "I really enjoyed being a diesel tech. Fortunately, the job also comes with a decent amount of truck driving." Another commenter down below called 3 boobs are nice said, "To be honest, the best day is when you turn it back in. Stay safe." OP responded and said, "Been there, done that, a lot less stress." What more can we say about this one besides OP, congrats on getting yourself set up for life with a little bit of malicious compliance. Now, we've got a couple of truckers over in the Karma Stories Discord, and I think they're absolutely going to love this story and probably talk about it for a good hour or so in the chat in Discord like they did over the Kevin in a Big Rig story. If you want to join in on that conversation, join the Karma Stories Discord at the link in the description down below. This story comes to us from Cynical Mage. Going forward, fit notes required. The background here is that during work, I had an accident that damaged my back, slip discs that didn't resolve, and subsequent additional damage due to unnatural wear and tear from compensating poor posture and gait. I had a fit note that cleared me for light duties. Now, most of my store team were, and are, these guys are my family even years later, incredibly supportive of my various limitations. Depending on whether I was having a good day or bad, they'd shuffle things around. We did that for everyone. We worked to accommodate whoever needed a helping hand. Just to clarify that I wasn't given special treatment. My main difficulty is standing still. Sitting, walking, moving, those are fine. On a good day, I can stand at the self-checkouts for a couple of hours with some pacing. On a bad day, not at all. Good days, I can work delivery or backstock. Bad days, I did decarding, facing up, putbacks, write-offs, and sitting on tills. However, one colleague was not. She considered it drastically unfair that everyone worked around my damage. So much so that she went above everyone to file a complaint to the store manager that I should be forced to do self-checkouts too. Sunday evening, a charming message was sent to the work WhatsApp group by one of the lower managers, stating that going forward, having pain here so you can't do self-checkouts, having pain there so you can't do delivery will no longer be accepted. Unless you have a fit note, you can't refuse to do your tasks. I was scheduled to work on the Monday, thankfully a closing shift, so I had a narrow window to work with. Monday, 8 a.m., the stars aligned. I was blessed to snag a telephone call back from a GP. If you're in the UK, you know how hard it is to talk to a doctor, let alone see one since the plague. It's a nightmare. Anyway, I explained the situation to her, and she was furious. Emailed me an amended fit note to hand into work. That afternoon, I cheerfully went in and handed it to the duty manager for the shift, who read it and then promptly started pissing herself laughing before letting me get started. A 3-month fit note that prohibited me from any lifting, pulling, standing, anything remotely strenuous whatsoever, and stated frequent, regular breaks, effectively barring me from all the tasks I did on good days. Apparently, that colleague blew a gasket, filed a complaint with the area manager, who dismissed it, whereupon she told him she'd go to HR about this, as well as his inaction, and was promptly told that this would constitute harassment and disability discrimination if she insisted. Well, you did want a fit note. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Tremenda Karucha. It says, "It's so frustrating how someone could be so inconsiderate, but I'm really glad you got the support you needed from your doctor. It's exhausting dealing with all that, but please remember, you're not alone, and there are people who understand what you're going through, even if they don't always say it out loud." OP responded and said, "The rest of the guys were honestly fantastic, but then they had been there when my back went, yet again, lifted me into the office and got me ice, or carried me to my husband's car, kept me sane during my time off with encouragement while I was immobile, and during my workouts to try regaining strength. Not a week goes by without us chatting or sending memes and reels, and they're all still trying to convince me to come back or ask advice or whatever. I genuinely have so much love for them, which my family doesn't understand exactly, but we've been through so much together that we're probably trauma bonded." Another commenter called Zorab1 replied to OP and said, "Hope that colleague was shunned." OP responded and said, "Nobody wants to work with her. They tried sending her to another store where a couple of people used to work with us all, and they actually put it to a vote, unanimously declined. Several people changed shifts to avoid her, but many can't due to college or childcare. And last I heard 2 weeks ago, a mass grievance was filed with all signing that they basically want her gone. They do not want to work with her. So she's now on a final warning." Another commenter called ABM1968 responded to OP's comment there and said, "So if she's looking for opportunities outside the company, will you return?" OP responded and said, "All depends on what's going on at home, to be honest. With my daughter moving home with her partner and 2 babies, I'm currently the default babysitter since she went back to work herself. Both my old store colleagues and the other one that declined her notify me whenever they're hiring, with one manager offering me transport if I do mornings with her, as it's further away and I don't drive. Thing that makes me laugh is that they know I'm an absolute butthole in many ways, know my damage, but I'm also the one you want if crap hits the fan. It's a limbo situation, to be honest. I miss my crew, I even miss many customers. I have issues, don't judge me, but I will only go back if we have a serious conversation about working around my grandkids. I simply can't do 50 or 60 hours per week anymore. That conversation won't be for a while. We'll see once we've dealt with my father-in-law's funeral and all the headaches with arrangements." I just absolutely love this story. Hey, OP, you can't do that without a note. OP says, okay, I'll get a note. And the doctor is complicit and does exactly what OP wants, even going a little bit further than they needed to. Absolutely perfect, malicious compliance. OP, you did a wonderful job. I hope you can get back and work with those colleagues, but if not, it's a wonderful thing that you keep in touch with them because they sound like awesome people. This story comes to us from Magnolia. Trying to save money on travel made them spend more. Oops. I used to work for a tech contracting company that pinched pennies. This company recruited a handful of people for a large tech company and got away with paying below market wages because they targeted new grads and let us all work remotely. I was fresh out of college and just thankful to have a job, especially one in my field. My company's travel policy covered airfare, cheapest option only, hotel costs, very low cost cap per night, and a small per diem for food. One decent dinner would eat up most of this. Their travel policy actually started out as, we will not reimburse you for anything, but we'll also fire you if you don't show up, which is a different story for another time. Most everyone on my team was out of state and would require a flight to get to the office on the rare occasion us remote workers were required in office 3 to 4 times a year. I was, however, fairly close to the office, and whenever I traveled, I would just drive my car. The gas costs were minimal, and I liked having my car with me. And my company was happy because I could get cheaper hotels that were slightly further from the office, and they didn't have to pay for airfare. Flying was technically possible for me, would have been several $100s though. After one trip, I mentioned to a manager at large tech that I wasn't getting mileage reimbursement for driving my personal car, and she flagged it to contracting company and forced them to change their policy, which was very kind of her, but was not my intention. So I got a retroactive reimbursement for mileage for that trip, which ended up being just over $100 for a week and a half of travel. Nothing crazy, I was glad to have it, and was happy that would be the policy going forward. But when planning my next trip, contracting company mentioned their travel policy had been updated. No more reimbursing mileage for personal vehicles, but now car rentals were covered if the worker was located within 500 miles and would be driving to the office. And they recommended I rent a car for this trip, since they figured it would be cheaper than getting a flight. I asked if I could just drive my car and get reimbursed like last time, but they declined and said it was the new policy. Since they wanted to save money, and I'm such a team player, I went with their recommendation and rented a car for my next 2-week trip. The only car within policy was a tiny sedan, the cheapest option. I was 21 at this point in my life, maybe 22. Car rental companies have a daily surcharge for drivers under 25. So the total cost for just the car ended up being close to $800 before the cost of gas, which was actually more than before since this tiny sedan was not actually fuel efficient at all compared to my personal car. After the trip, I submitted my receipts for reimbursement and got pushback due to the cost. Just company policy. They did pay me back about a month or so later, and they told me next trip I could drive my own car again, and they'd reimburse for mileage, and would be updating the policy again to reflect this. But then the pandemic happened, and all in-office visits were cancelled. I now am very lucky enough to work at a different company that has a very generous travel policy, and treats its employees very well overall, which I appreciate more fully than some of my current coworkers, I think. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Zumbo Prime. It says, "Oh, to be a fly on the wall of the bean counter that makes these policies, looking exclusively at data points without any hint or interest in the context of any of it. Very efficient at making small exceptions turn into large expenses." You know, I can actually see how this one fell through in the bean counter department because it's a large company. OP said that there weren't a lot of people there, but they probably still have a bunch of people that they have to deal with and aren't really focused in on one employee specific situation. So OP rented a car like they told them to, they submitted their receipts and it was $800 and they were told not to do it again next time. So it sounds like they made a mistake in the bean counter department, but then they fixed it up again right after. I guess they were kind of doing their job. Anyway, let me know what you think on this one. Comment down below if you're on YouTube or on Spotify. This story comes to us from Icy Computer Poop. Get rid of those effing dandelions. I'm 24, living in my first place on my own. I'd rented a townhouse. This was back in the late 80s, even when poor people could rent entire houses, and was putting myself through college. Not a lot of money to spare, but I was getting by. The townhouse was not detached, and I had two neighbors whose homes were directly attached to my own. I got along fine with my southernmost neighbor, aka we said hi when we saw each other, and that was about it. But the other neighbor, he had a chip on his shoulder. Generally rude if we bumped into each other. I'd say hi or good morning, he'd ignore me, scowl, turn away, etc. Whatever, no big deal, I just took it in stride. Being a struggling college student, I didn't have a lot of money for non-essentials. Most of the people in the neighborhood poured weed killer on their lawns every spring. I didn't do this for several reasons. Most important, I think it's a shame to poison the local water table. And while I love a nice lawn, I don't think you have to cater to grass. I prefer a more natural look. Back then, that meant regular grass, but with some crabgrass and dandelions. One day, Bob starts berating me over my dandelions. It doesn't fit the neighborhood. Don't you have any self-respect? You bring down the tone of the neighborhood. Every time he'd see me, he'd tell me I need to pour poison on my lawn, which I explained I couldn't afford and didn't want to do. At first, I was polite as I wanted to be on good terms with my neighbors, but Bob started getting angrier and more unreasonable, started calling me poor white trash. One day, I'm coming home, parking in my driveway with some friends from school in my car. As we're getting out, Bob comes outside and shouts at the top of his lungs, "Get rid of those effing dandelions!" He looks over and now spots my friends getting out of the car, and he's clearly embarrassed. But he doubled down and started talking directly with my friends. "Did you know your friend is an embarrassment to the neighborhood? How's it feel to be friends with white trash?" I had just about had enough of his anger by then, and I snapped back, told him to F off and mind his own business. Several days later, I get a knock on my front door. Open up the door, and it's a bylaw enforcement officer. Says he's responding to complaints of noxious weeds in my backyard, and asks to come take a look for himself. Being a middle unit, the only access to my backyard was through the house. I invite him in, offer him a drink, of which he gratefully accepts, it's a hot day, and take him through to the backyard. Lots of lovely white and yellow dandelions peppered over the yard. He takes one look and gives a deep sigh. There were no noxious weeds, which I knew full well, as I had long ago taken the precaution of checking with the city to see what and what was not acceptable in the weed department. And I knew I was very comfortably within compliance. The bylaw cop apologized for wasting my time, said my yard was nowhere near a problem. He left and went next door to chastise my neighbor for wasting his time. I stood at my front door and listened. It was glorious, listening to Bob sputtering and angry, trying to defend himself and vilify me, all to no avail. "My wife and I can't even sit out and enjoy our backyard because of all those stupid dandelions." Bylaw cop told him to stop harassing his neighbors and left. But listening in gave me an idea. I knew Bob liked to sit out on his back deck in the afternoons, so I waited. As soon as I spotted him out there, I walked out into my backyard, ignoring Bob, as I gathered up a nice bouquet of white-topped dandelions, seeds ready to disperse to the wind. We had a 4-foot-high chain-link fence between our properties, so the view between yards was pretty much unobstructed. I stood at the fence, locked eyes with Bob, and started blowing thousands of dandelion seeds into his yard. The wind was at my back, so the seeds were traveling quite far into his yard. He grew red-faced and started yelling at me. "What's the matter, Bob? I'm just doing what you asked and getting rid of my dandelions." He yelled more, and I just ignored him. After depositing several dandelions worth of seeds, he went back inside. From that day forward, for the next several weeks, every single time I saw him out on his deck, I'd go out and send more dandelion seeds into his yard. Eventually, dandelion flowering season ended. I wanted to think that Bob learned a lesson about bullying, but he didn't. I'll post some of his other attempts at some other time. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called ByAffectionate2810. It says, I have a neighbor like this that takes great care of his yard and glares at the dandelions in my yard. My wife and I like our flower weeds. He never says anything, just glares. Another commenter down below called Confusable Fraggle said, laugh out loud, many years ago I had a good friend who was a master gardener. She ran the local garden club for a while and won several awards for her various gardens. She had gorgeous displays of native wildflowers, flowering bushes, a to-die-for display of roses, and a huge veggie garden. She told me that a weed is any plant in a place it isn't wanted, and that if the plant is one you want or like, then it's not a weed on your property. Therefore, if you like dandelions and clovers and whatever else, they are not weeds if you like them where they grow. I have used her definition of weeds ever since. Alright, so I can fully admit that I haven't been absolutely prudent about removing weeds from my lawn over the years. And my neighbor to the one side, who is coincidentally named Bob as well, has one of the most beautiful lawns in our neighborhood. He spends a lot of time on it, it looks amazing, and he absolutely is very proud of it, and he should be. But I know, even though he hasn't said anything, that he looks over here at my lawn and just shakes his head. Ugh, I wish I was a better neighbor, but I need more time to work on these things. This story comes to us from My Reddit Saga. No more taking advantage of flexible hours. Your day ends at 4 p.m. from now on. This happened a long time ago, about 13 to 15 years ago. I had just started a job at a government agency where I was responsible for a big fleet of cars. My duties included driving the vehicles to various places like repair shops, tire companies, glass repair shops, and inspection centers. I also performed simple repairs myself, like replacing some light bulbs, not all. In addition to all of that, I hand washed and cleaned every car, both inside and out, refilled the windshield washer fluid, and made sure all the required items were in each car. Washing a car inside and out, checking the fluids, and making sure all the necessary equipment was present took a minimum of 45 minutes, and a maximum of about an hour. About a month into the job, my boss decided I was taking too much advantage of my flexible working hours, and told me that I had to stop working precisely at 4 p.m. So I decided to follow my boss's rule to the letter. As the days went on, and if it was after 3:15 p.m., I didn't think I had enough time to start washing and fixing another car. So instead, I did other small tasks, like sweeping the floor or restocking the supply room. After a few weeks of this, my boss noticed that fewer cars had been cleaned and fixed in total. So he called me into a meeting to ask why. That's when I brought up his policy that I have to leave at exactly 4 p.m. and that I shouldn't be taking advantage of my flexible hours. The boss suddenly realized why I had been taking advantage of the flexible hours before. I was simply working smart. Some days I would go home a little earlier after a car was finished, and on other days I needed an extra 5 to 20 minutes to complete a car. It wasn't a daily issue, but it happened often enough that the boss's new policy created a problem. So after the boss had been thinking for a moment, he said that we should go back to the way I was working before. He apologized for his poor policy and admitted that he was wrong. I ended up staying at that job for about 2 more years, and we got along well for that entire time. Jumping down to the comments on this one, everybody was surprised about a boss that was able to actually listen, reflect, fess up that they were wrong, and go with the best option. Wow, that just doesn't happen. I mean, every once in a while here, we get a boss who's willing to go back to the way things were before, only because they put their tail between their legs and kinda walk away without saying anything. A boss that apologizes really is a gem, and one that you want to keep with as long as you can. This story comes to us from Submarine Radio. You want a directly observed urinalysis? You got it. So I'm in the military, and anyone who served knows the sacred ritual of the urinalysis. It's not just peeing in a cup, it's peeing in a cup while being stared at like you're about to commit a felony with your bladder. Normally, the observer stands behind you, gives you space, and just makes sure you're not pulling any shady business. But this time, nah. This guy was new and clearly took direct observation to mean make eye contact with the stream. He tells me, pants and underwear all the way down, shirt up, free hand at your side, no touching anything except the bottle. I need a clear view. I blinked. You want a clear view? He nodded, dead serious. So I complied maliciously. I dropped everything to my ankles, lifted my shirt like I was flashing Times Square, and stood there like a statue. I made direct eye contact with him the entire time. No blinking, no shame, just pure unfiltered compliance. He looked uncomfortable. I looked serene. It took me a solid minute to start peeing because, performance anxiety. But I held the pose. I even asked, "Is this clear enough for you, sir?" He said he's only making me do it per the instruction at the command. He kinda just stared at the wall like he regretted every life choice that led him to this moment. After I finished, I pulled everything up, washed my hands, and walked out. Wait a second, can we revisit part of this where he says, one hand at the side, the other hand on the cup? Okay. Am I just supposed to be free swinging right here and making sure I actually get some of this stuff into that cup? This is like a spray and pray situation, right? Another question is, what is this guy's job title? The one that has to watch. Is he the meat gazer? Or the wiener watcher? Or maybe even the pecker checker? This story comes to us from Messy Jesse Zero. Oh, I'll smile alright. I, 21 female, work part-time at a retail clothing store while I'm finishing college. It's your typical mall chain, overpriced basics, weird music, and managers who think the customer is always right, even when the customer is actively shoplifting. One day during my shift, my manager Craig, 40s, always smells like Axe and insecurity, pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I noticed you don't smile much. You should really smile more. It makes customers feel welcome." I said, "You mean be friendlier?" He said, "No, literally just smile more, even when no one's talking to you. Just keep a smile on." Okay, Craig, you want smiles? You got it. For the rest of my shift and every shift after, I smiled. But not like normal smiling. I smiled wide, with too much teeth. I smiled while folding jeans. I smiled while sweeping. I smiled while telling a Karen we didn't have her size. I smiled at customers until they asked, "Are you okay?" One guy legit said I looked like I was about to snap. Another asked if I was in a cult. A little kid started crying when I greeted her at the fitting room. Coworkers caught on and joined me. We started calling it Smile Mode. By the end of the week, it looked like a haunted mannequin showroom. Craig finally told us to tone it down. I asked sweetly, still smiling, "Oh, I thought you said to smile more." He didn't bring it up again. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Bandcat1. It says, "I'm a man. I had a supervisor tell me to smile more once. When I did, I made sure to keep dead eyes and slightly tilted my head down. It creeped her out and asked me to stop immediately. It was never brought up again." I want to clarify a statement that OP made because it's one that you hear all the time when people talk about retail and customers, and it is the one of, "the customer is always right." Well, actually, that's not the full sentence. The full sentence is, "the customer is always right in matters of taste." What this literally means is that you never question a customer's style or what they like, no matter how ugly or inappropriate you think it is. You sell them what they want because they know what they want. They know what works for them. Customers are absolutely not always right if they're being rude to you, or causing a scene, or being a Karen. There truly are limits to what you should be putting up with, and I would never let a customer walk all over you, regardless of the job that you are in. This story comes to us from Ancient Educator 76. No dishes until department closes. Hello all, I work as both a teacher and at your Arizona hometown grocer. After I finish teaching 4th graders, I go to work in the deli department. There are tons of things to do. Sweep and mop, take in the teas, the soups, tear down the hot case, which has about 20 items that get tossed out and have dishes needing to be done. I've developed a system where I work on the dishes as I go, and there is a bell to ring if someone needs customer service. Some customer didn't like this daunting task of having to ring a bell to get my attention. So a new policy has been adopted by the store management team. No doing dishes until the department is closed. This is a problem. The deli department doesn't have the hours to pay us past our scheduled time. And on top of this, anytime we work past our scheduled time in the department counts as overtime. Double whammy for them. I didn't believe this was the case, but either way, this was a logistical impossibility. I knew that I couldn't do the dishes after the department closes without, going past closing time. Enter Malicious Compliance. I pace back and forth through the front of the deli, watching for customers as I clean the slicers and countertops, the only things I could do for cleaning because they were within eyesight of customers. I have about 6 customers from 4 to 7 walking past a 4x3x3 sink full of dishes piled past the top and spilling over. I keep thinking how dumb this is that I can't do the dishes right now, but resign myself to keep my malicious compliance plans of only working on customer service until 7 p.m. I keep tearing down stations and the dishes keep getting higher and piled more messily. Finally, 7 p.m. I start doing dishes and I finish about 2.5 hours later. I do this 2 more times during the week and get pulled into the office with the deli manager and assistant manager both there. Assistant manager says, "It appears there's a bit of a problem here because you shouldn't be taking 3 hours to do the dishes." Then deli manager comes in. "Yeah, why don't you do the dishes in between customers?" I slowly look over to a very sheepish looking assistant manager who looks at me like they want me to shut up. I said that management said I can't do the dishes until the department closes. This started an argument back and forth between Sylvia, my deli manager, and the assistant manager that turned so angry that I got uncomfortable. "These overtime hours aren't coming out of my department, fix it." The assistant manager yelled back at her, "Look, you're overstepping here, we'll take it out of mine this time. Just OP, make sure you do the dishes in between customers." I got close to 9 hours overtime that week. Maybe I'll get some new shoes. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called Avid Learner. It says, "That's wild how a dumb rule like that creates more work and drama. I mean, really, cleaning as you go makes sense. You can't just wait until the end of the day to fix everything, especially when it's piling up and causing overtime messes. It's like management thinks there's a time machine or something." Another commenter down below called Sweetberry0 said, "That moment the assistant manager realizes they've shot themselves in the foot and their own department's budget is just chef's kiss. The sheer audacity of management to create a rule like that, then get mad at you when you follow it to the letter, and it costs them money." Was anybody else surprised on this one that OP actually stuck around to do all the dishes? I mean, if there was a chance they were going to say, "No, you can't do that because we don't pay overtime," if there was the slightest chance I wasn't going to get paid for that time, I would have been like, "Oh, look, my day's done, time to leave. Not my problem if the dishes aren't done." I can understand the frustration on OP's side though, because if they need that money because being a teacher in their state doesn't pay enough to support a household, then they don't want to rock the boat in their second job. This story comes to us from Championship Alarmed. "Just a nice little walk. Sure, love it." The company I work for is renovating our building, so we were moved to a different office. The new location adds about 10 minutes to my commute, but that's not a big deal. The new building has parking, but we didn't get enough access cards for everyone. Since I only come in twice a week, I didn't get one. My direct boss told me I could go to the front desk, and if there was a space available, they'd give me a card. That should always be the case since we're all on 1/3 time work from home contracts. A little inconvenient, but still not a big deal. On my first day there, however, the front desk lady made it very clear and very loudly that this was not happening. The cards are personalized, but the parking spots aren't. This is an inner city location, so there's no chance of parking on the street. I called my boss, who redirected me to his boss, who then told me to park either at our old office, a 20-minute walk away, or at another company location, a 15-minute walk away, and enjoy a nice little walk. Excuse me? That would mean losing 40 minutes of my working time. I can't start earlier or stay later because I need to be home when my kids get back from school. I spoke to someone from the Works Council and he told me to read my contract. The workplace is listed as the old office, which means my workday starts when I arrive there and ends when I leave. So, sure thing, boss's boss. I'll park there and take that nice little walk, counted as working hours. Let's see how long I can keep this up until they react. They can't really fire me anyway, since I'm one of only a handful of experts in the country, and the other guy quit 3 months ago. 2 weeks and 6 work walks later, I get an email from the highest level boss about this issue. Suddenly, day passes can be issued so everyone can park at the current location, even though the contract location hasn't changed. I live in a country where firing people isn't easy. Interestingly, the front desk lady I dealt with before was moved to another location. My timesheets have now been revised 4 times, each showing the walk as a business trip. The boss's boss, who was set to retire in 8 months, got the golden handshake and will retire at the end of this month. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Tremenda Karucha. It says, "It's kinda wild how a simple parking snafu turned into this red tape nightmare. Everyone's just passing the buck instead of fixing the actual problem." Another commenter down below called Working Editor 3435 said, "Good for you. Workers Council, hard to fire, employment contract, no parking available in the city. This is how you say you work in Germany without saying you work in Germany." Alright, I'm not sure how the temperature goes over where OP is, but here in the middle of the summer, if I needed to walk 20 minutes to get from my car to work, I would be a drenched mess by the time I got there. We've been between 32 and 35 Celsius over the last little while with this heat wave going through, and I sweat like crazy. So if you want me to stink, by all means, I'll park 20 minutes away. Thanks. This story comes to us from Heaven Dancer. Only phone calls matter? You get what you asked for. My mother is toxic and likes to have unspoken rules for me that I never know exist until I break them. However, I have one time in my life where I broke one but decided she was going to eat her own words because I had enough. A few years ago, her birthday in May landed on a weekday with Mother's Day that weekend. I was busy at work that week and was already working weekends and overtime. But I always made sure to remember her birthday and Mother's Day. I bought her presents, sent her a birthday card and Mother's Day card, texted her a happy birthday and Mother's Day, and even gave a very well thought out post on her Facebook. It's all I had time for. However, I never heard a word from her. She didn't call me, nor did I get a text if she even received the present that I sent her. No thank yous, nothing. I was too busy to even ask about it, and with her typical behavior of ignoring me, I just didn't press her about it. In December, a special event came up in my life which I told her about several times. My sister had similar events, and my mother always remembered hers. So when it came and went with her saying nothing, I brought it up over text. I was told that she didn't realize it was important to me. I was upset and admittedly angry over once again being ignored and forgotten about. Cue her usual deflection, in which she then turned the entire argument around on me. And that's when I found out she did receive my present 7 months later. She then told me, and I quote, "You didn't think it hurt my feelings when you didn't bother to call me on my birthday or Mother's Day? Sorry, but Facebook cards just don't get it, and neither does texting." Fine. Cue my malicious compliance. For the next year, she never got a text, a Facebook post, birthday present, Mother's Day present, Christmas present, etc. But she got her phone call on her birthday and holidays. Phone calls are the only thing she received because, as she said, other forms of communication and thoughtful gestures didn't cut it. After a year of this, my mother sends in her reliable flying monkey. My sister calls me to tell me that Mom doesn't think you love her because you don't send her presents anymore. I'd like to say I stood my ground, but at that time I was still a doormat, so the malicious compliance ended. I'm no contact with my family now, but to this day, it makes me proud that for once, I used her words against her and set a boundary. She never said that to me again, so it was worth it. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called Equivalent Salary 357 who quoted OP when they said, "I'd like to say I stood my ground, but at the time I was still a doormat." They said, "It takes time for us to change. Very seldom is it truly instantaneous. Try not to look back and criticize yourself for the time it took to become the new you." Easy for me to say try not to, but although it's something I struggle with, it's something I try to remember. Another commenter down below called Aggravating Owl 7333 said, gestating a fetus doesn't always mean that a woman deserves respect. Sometimes it just means that they were a walking incubator. I'm speaking from personal experience. OP responded and said, the stories I could tell of her being a mother, I moved far, far away, and honestly, it was the best thing I ever did, next to finally just cutting contact. It's been a year so far, no regrets. I miss having the concept of a mother, but since she didn't always want to be a good one, I'm not missing her as a mother. I really don't understand the part of a parent thinking that they're entitled to a gift from their children. I mean, send me a text, give me a phone call, or maybe even an email, I don't care. Just acknowledge that the birthday's there, and I'm good to go because as long as you're still talking to me, then we're in good shape. This story comes to us from C-Stam Tech. Grandma cares. I'm not 100% sure this fits, but it's a story that I've never forgotten and elevated my grandma to almost godlike status in the eyes of a young elementary kid. When I was in early elementary school, I was visiting my grandma with my family. This was the late 70s, early 80s, and my grandma had tons of binders full of photos of kids, grandkids, family events, etc. When visiting, we would often pull them out and look through them. This morning, it happened to be me, 7 or 8 male, sister 10 to 11 female, and cousin 10 to 11 female, looking through the photo binders with grandma sitting in a chair nearby. We had been pulling them out of the cabinet end table, looking through them, when either my sister or my cousin ran across a photo of me in one of the binders. The picture was of me around 2 years old, standing in my birthday suit, head to toe with nothing hidden. I don't recall exactly anything that my sister or cousin said, but I remember them making fun of me and picking on me. I kept telling them to stop. I got more and more upset, but they kept going. I think Grandma was just sitting watching this exchange until I turned to her and said, Grandma. Grandma slid forward in her chair and, in a nice, even tone, told the girls to give her the binder. She looked at the page with my picture, opened the page, and took out the picture. Sister and cousin were quiet as soon as she asked for the binder. She looked at the picture and then handed it to me and said, Here, this is yours. And she sat back in her chair. I remember my mood completely changed, like I'd been given the most amazing gift. I looked back at her and asked, It's mine? She said, Yep. I think this is the malicious compliance. I proceeded to rip that picture into as many tiny pieces as possible with the biggest smile on my face, while my sister and cousin complained to my grandma that I was destroying the photo and that I should stop. Her response, with no other words while all this is happening, in that calm grandma tone, It's his picture, he can do whatever he wants with it. The only thing I remember after that is having the biggest smile on my face while joyfully tossing all those small pieces in the garbage, while my sister and cousin whined and complained. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called 1R Ferris. It says, I feel like there is an important lesson here for parents, but I can't quite grasp it. Not just don't take photos of your kids in the buff, that should be obvious. I'm thinking about the way the grandma gave OP ownership of the thing that was causing him distress, not telling him he could destroy it as a solution to his problem, just that it's his now. There is something there that I respect, and I'm trying to figure out how to internalize this concept for my own parenting style. I couldn't agree more with OP's grandma in this one by giving OP the agency to decide what to do with that photograph. Instead of always telling our kids what to do or dealing with situations ourselves so they don't have to, we need to allow them to make more decisions. Then they learn to deal with the consequences of their own actions. This story comes to us from LivingAd4941. Don't ask me to wear a collared shirt at 9 p.m. for the following morning and not expect a surprise. This one is actually pretty funny. I was doing training to become an instructor in a very, very lax job where jeans are a requirement. I was doing training 3 hours away and they never told us we needed a collared shirt. I was just planning to wear a black V-neck shirt all weekend while teaching. However, the night before my 7 a.m. class at 9 p.m., they text us and said, You need to have a collared shirt for tomorrow. I was like, Ain't no way you're telling me this 3 hours from home. Irritated, I went to Target at 9 p.m. and said, I'm gonna wear a Hawaiian shirt just to be spiteful. They said collared, not what kind of collared. So I picked one up and showed up with it the next morning, took off my jacket, and looked my boss square in the eye and said, be careful what you ask for. They all laughed so hard. The students loved it, they loved it, I loved it, and that's the story of how I ended up with a Lilo and Stitch Hawaiian shirt. Jumping into the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Nope Ninja Squirrel. It says, perfect malicious compliance. I hope you expensed that too, since it wasn't a requirement communicated ahead of time, and they forced you to go out and buy a shirt. Therefore, working expense. OP responded and said, I should. My tax guy is going to be like, what and why? Another commenter down below called Sino01 said, according to a Hawaiian professor I had 20 years ago, Hawaiian shirts are appropriate in any situation, depending on how they're worn. Unbuttoned equals casual. Buttoned equals business casual. Tucked equals formal. OP responded to this and said, then there's me, tucked, unbuttoned, and in my jean capris and Adidas sneakers. I look fabulous. This story comes to us from Captain Mookie. You need me to stop calling in advance for my trading card game order? I just got home from this experience and I wanted to share. As a hobby, I have taken to trading card games, Pokemon and Magic the Gathering to be specific. I am not collecting sealed products, but rather I am usually buying bulk so that I can make multiple decks and play with my family. This is important because I am often making huge bulk orders that consist of 50 cards or more. There are a few shops near me, and I am fortunate enough to be close to about 5 hobby shops that sell Pokemon and Magic singles. I managed to drag my family into the Pokemon trading card game hobby roughly a year ago. Since then, the process of making an order was to select from their online stock and check out with the cart. At this time, you're given 2 options, pay in advance for your order or pay in the store. Paying in advance, while very sensible, has often led to cards being paid for that they did not have in stock, as in, it was mistakenly labeled as in stock but actually was not. This would then result in a refund system that would take 2 to 3 days to complete. The issue is that it was super inconvenient when I had to wait 2 to 3 days to recoup the money. I personally experienced a transaction of a $10 card that needed to be refunded. So I spoke to one of the staff and they told me, when you have big orders, it's perfectly fine to call ahead of time and we can pick the order when we have time. In fact, as long as you don't abuse this process, it works out for everyone. That staff member is awesome, and so for a year, that's exactly what I did. This process accomplishes 3 things. 1, I am not paying for a product that couldn't be fulfilled. 2, I would reduce my time waiting because I called ahead of time by 4 to 5 hours. 3, the staff members would have plenty of time to grab the order. I never abused this process and always came through when I said I would come through. Now, this wouldn't be malicious compliance if not for the next part. About 2 months ago, me and my family took the dive into Magic the Gathering because Commander is a blast. This has caused me to start hoarding cards again and making decks for myself and for my family's usage. So I was back into the swing of things again, making 50 plus single card orders from this shop that I loved very much. During my usual 4-hour in advance phone call, I was told, hey, you have to stop calling in these orders. It's store policy to only pull orders that have been paid for. We won't be pulling your cards until they're paid for. Weird. I was told otherwise, but I will ask them when I get there. So I get there to pick up and pay for my order and try to explain that this process was something that a previous staff member told me was a-okay and even encouraged. There were 2 staff members and they both responded again with a very terse and repeated message of, it's store policy. The message was fine enough, but the tone and rudeness had me floored. They told me from now on, prepay for all my orders and then come to pick them up. So here's where malicious compliance begins. It was clear what they wanted me to do, prepay and show up. So a few weeks later, what I did was scroll through their inventory and started the blingification of my decks. I proceeded to spend roughly 40 minutes scrolling through their online inventory and adding to my cart with various amounts of the most hollow foil basic land cards I could find for under $1. For those of you who aren't familiar, these basic lands are pretty cheap, 10 cents to 60 cents each. They also are categorized by sets and as individual printings, so each basic land has its own set and its own foil print version. This means that they would need to hunt each land by set and by foil print. I had carded roughly 100 cards. 100 cards that they would need to hunt through at least 40 different sets. They would also need to specifically find the foil only of the basic lands. Even more, I gave them an hour of time to pick the order. An hour, while definitely not a lot of time, is more than enough to grab this order. When I get there, it was one of the two guys that had reinforced the new method of ordering. Even better, he was swamped. He hadn't even started my order. I would have loved to have given him the 4 to 5 hours that I normally would give, but it was store policy that I stopped calling in advance and just order, pay, and show up. So I wait. I asked if they started my order. He quickly responded with, "Yes, I'm getting to it." I think that even he knew that this would have been much easier if I'd called 4 hours in advance like I normally would. This may be strange to say, but I was very happy that there were 4 cards that were not available for the order. So I had paid for 4 cards that I would never see fulfilled. Do you remember the staff member that was awesome? Yeah, he showed up about 30 minutes into my wait and he asked if I had been waiting for a long time. I said that it was about 30 minutes. For my wait, he had given me one of the tournament participant packs, and I had actually pulled a $30 card, Roaming Throne. The exchange was made, I waited 40 minutes. 4 cards were missing. I plan on approaching their social media or shop owner and ask for clarification from the establishment on what I should be doing in the future. That will be something I do in the near future, but for now, I feel vindicated. The staff member had to frantically hunt for the cards and even had to tell me that there were cards missing. All things that the previous system avoided. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Gyros for Gyrus. It says, "I hope you took a second or two to point out how awful this system is." OP responded and said, "So I did, but it wasn't as constructive as I would hope. I asked the nice dude if this was still how I should be doing this. Should I keep prepaying, even if you guys don't really know if the card is in stock? He tried to tell me that the refund stuff should be faster now, depending on your bank, and we talked about past refund experiences. I even asked if I should call in advance, and he kind of shrugged and said, 'Do whatever you think helps.' Basically, not a super helpful conversation. The guy who pulled my order, one of the 2 original staff members who were rude to me, seemed disinterested in talking much. Right after the transaction, he seemed to have slipped away before really interacting with me. Alright, let me know in the comments down on YouTube or on Spotify what you would have done in this situation. I feel like I would have handled it a little bit differently than OP did. I think I would have let them spend all that time pulling all those cards out, and then I would have said, "Oh, well, because you don't have those couple of ones that I really wanted, I don't want the whole order now. Sorry. Have a nice day." I mean, I could understand that they were just following policy, but they didn't need to give a whole bunch of attitude when OP walked into the store and asked about the cards. Because of that attitude, I would do exactly that. "Oh, sorry, I don't want this anymore. You'll have to put it all back now." This story comes to us from Amy94. Site Super demands our tools are properly organized, so we followed his exact instructions. I've been doing construction for 15 years. Our crew of 8 had been working this office complex project together for 18 months, with a good supervisor who was easy to work with and trusted us to do our jobs. The super was in his 60s and was about to retire. The last night we had an awesome night out to see him off after a long career for his well-deserved retirement. The next week, his replacement arrived, Derek, fresh out of construction management school, maybe 24, with exactly 1 previous job site under his belt. Dude shows up with a clipboard and an attitude. After a week of observing us, which seemed to involve texting back and forth with his girlfriend while commenting on our work, Derek calls a meeting and announces a new rule. Every tool must be returned to its designated position immediately after each use. No exceptions. Anyone who's actually done construction knows this is insane. When you're hanging drywall, you use your drill, then your level, then your pencil, then your tape measure, then back to the drill. Putting each tool away after every single use would triple your work time. I tried explaining this. Derek wasn't interested in input from people who had been doing this since before he was a gleam in his daddy's eye. So we gave Derek exactly what he wanted. Monday morning, we started putting every single tool back in its designated spot after every single use. Installing one outlet box became a 45-minute task. Grab drill, use it, walk back to the toolbox, organize it perfectly. Grab level, use it, walk back, organize it perfectly. Repeat for every single tool. What normally takes 10 minutes is now taking 45 minutes, but our tools were perfectly organized at all times. By Tuesday afternoon, Derek was getting frantic calls about why we were so far behind schedule. He came over red-faced, demanding to know what was taking so long. Just following your efficiency protocols, boss. Every tool back immediately after use, like you said. Derek tried backpedaling, saying he meant when you are done with a task. I pulled out my phone and played back the recording of his speech where he specifically said, immediately after each use, no exceptions. By Thursday, the project manager was on site asking why productivity had dropped 75%. When he found out about Derek's tool policy, he looked at Derek like he'd grown a second head. Derek got transferred the following Monday. Our old super came back to fill in until a replacement could be found. Took one look at us obsessively organizing tools and said, "Cut it out, you idiots, we've got work to do." We finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule. So are we saying on this one that Derek was the wrong tool for the job? I sincerely hope that when they brought old supervisor back from retirement to take over until somebody else could be hired on, that old supervisor took them to the cleaners and made them pay like a year's worth of salary, even if it was only for a few months of work. Coming back from retirement because you guys screwed up, you would definitely pay me, and it would be a lot. This story comes to us from GabbyFest234. Roommate broke my can opener, so I bought a new one that I knew I could figure out how to use. So I rent rooms out in my house. I generally do it with friends or friends of friends. A couple of years ago, I had this roommate who was the ex-husband of a friend of mine, and I felt sorry for him, so I gave him a discount on rent. He still fell behind, but that's a totally different malicious compliance story. He was the worst roommate I've ever had for many reasons. But for this account, he was pretty much living off of canned food when he wasn't stealing my food, and he used my can opener every day. Well, he broke it, and he came to me and told me that, as landlord, I needed to get a new can opener. Before I get to the malicious compliance, let me add, he was very proud of his Harvard PhD. He didn't use it in his minimum wage job, but he never avoided an opportunity to remind me that my PhD was from a state school, and his was from Harvard. Note, I was working in the career that used my PhD knowledge, and the program I went to has several Nobel laureates, and I've worked with some of them. My roommate was pretty much a failure in life and had slipped into leeching off of others to survive. He had no marketable skills. Anyway, the malicious compliance. I bought a new can opener, but I got one that is really tricky to use. It basically works like an electric can opener, but is manual. I knew there was no way this incompetent roommate would be able to figure out how to use it, and he couldn't. I'd find mangled cans in the garbage, not even recycling. He came to me and asked how to use the can opener. My response? A guy with a Harvard degree should certainly be able to figure that out on his own, if a guy like me can. Hey, so how do you know when someone's gone to Harvard? Don't worry, they'll tell you. Can you imagine somebody who went to Harvard and was a vegan? They'd never shut up. Hey, OP, if they ever keep talking and talking, like they probably do, you could just tell them to can it. This story comes to us from Obadon1404. Be careful what you ask for. So this takes place in 2000. Don't remember what month, but I went to school in a small town where it was redneck as can be. Think people coming to school on tractors and stuff. We got a new principal fresh from Dallas, and a much bigger school district. Now remember, country school, we all had pocket knives, we wore jeans and button downs, and I happened to be going through the emo goth phase because F rednecks, you know. Me and my friend wore black pants with chains and black trench coats. First thing this principal does is declare no pocket knives. Wasn't a big deal, no one cared, and there wasn't metal detectors. Then he starts going after my crowd. Suddenly we're told no pentacles or Satanist jewelry. Well, even though we were doing the rebel thing, we were nerds through and through, played Magic the Gathering and chess, and immediately got copies of the school board rules. So we all declared our religion as Wiccan and refused. Principal tried to make us stop wearing them anyway. Our parents backed us up and he had no leg to stand on, so then he targeted our coats. That we couldn't stop, but he also declared we couldn't play Magic at lunch, stated it was too much like witchcraft, and other students were uncomfortable. So, back to the rules. Come to find out, per their policies, we could create a chess club and have a teacher sponsor us. As long as chess was being played, we were allowed to play any game that involved strategy. Few weeks in, he swings by and the 12 of us are in there, 2 playing chess, the rest Magic. He loses his crap and says we're through and to shut it down. We were prepared though. Per the rules, unless a club is not actively competing, they cannot be shut down without full board approval. We went on to place second in state in chess and kept our club going, laugh out loud. He left not long after. I guess freedom of religion isn't really freedom of religion to people who are in some religions, if that makes sense. This story, though, was more about control of the principal over the students and not letting the students be who the students want to be. The only thing I agree with that the school did in this story was remove pocket knives from this situation, because who the hell brings something like that to school? This story comes to us from Mother Soraka. Manager said, no phones during work hours, period. So I stopped answering his calls. I work IT support for a medium-sized company. We've always been allowed to have our phones at our desks. Sometimes family emergencies happen. Doctors call back, whatever. As long as we weren't scrolling social media all day, nobody cared. New manager comes in last month, sees one person checking a text, and loses it. Sends out an email, effective immediately, no personal phones during work hours. They must be left in your car or locker. This means 9 to 5, no exceptions. Anyone caught with a phone will be written up. Okay, sure boss. The thing is, our manager works from home 3 days a week, and when server issues pop up after hours or on weekends, guess how he contacts us? That's right, our personal phones. We don't have company phones. Friday afternoon, 4:45 p.m., major server issue. I see it, could fix it in 10 minutes, but my phone is in my car as per policy. I calmly finish my work at 5 o'clock and walk out. By the time I get to my car and check my phone at 5:15, I have 17 missed calls and a string of increasingly panicked texts from my manager. The server has been down for 30 minutes. Multiple departments can't do anything. I call him back. Hey, just got to my car and saw your calls. What's up? He's furious, molding and seething, asking why I didn't answer. I remind him about the no phones policy. He says that's different, this was an emergency. I point out his email that said no exceptions, and I was just following policy to avoid a write-up. Monday morning, new email. Personal phones are permitted at desks for emergency purposes. Back to normal then. OP, you could have taken this one further. You know, you leave work, you get into your car, you drive all the way home first, then you look at your phone and realize you have all these missed calls and all these missed texts. Then you call the boss back and you say, oh, sorry, I don't use my phone in the car. That's unsafe. In fact, you could even take that one a step further and just leave your phone at home, because leaving it in your car is a theft risk and you don't want to lose your phone, right? Can we touch on one more thing here? If OP is actually on call and expected to answer the phone, I hope work is paying for some of their phone bill. If not, work needs to supply OP with a phone to be available to come into work when they need them. But you shouldn't have to use your own personal devices that you are paying for without compensation to make your workplace happy. Alright, I think we'll go ahead and end this episode here. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you're a Magic the Gathering or a Pokemon fan, make sure to hit that like button on your preferred podcasting platform. Or if you're on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video because it really does help us out. I thank you all for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.